Once again, the lives of high-flying South African pastors are in the spotlight. This time, self-proclaimed Shepherd Bushiri, his wife Mary and 3 others are currently out on bail following their arrest on a multitude of charges. They face charges of fraud, theft and money laundering to the value of over 100 million rand. Meanwhile, Nigerian pastor Omotoso is also in jail on charges including human trafficking and rape, all these committed under the guise of church and particularly Christianity. Unlike other countries such as Rwanda, where pastors are required to have a theology degree before they start their own congregation, churches are not regulated in South Africa. Should the religious sector be regulated? That's our social media question this evening. And remember that you can be part of the conversation by going to our social media pages using the hashtag SABC Unfiltered. That is hashtag SABC Unfiltered. Let's welcome our guest for this evening. We'll be joined by Professor David Musoma, who is the chairperson for the Commission for Religious and Linguistic Rights, CRL Commission. We also have Professor Maria Farm-Ab, who is an associate professor in the Department of Religion Studies at the University of Johannesburg. And later on, we'll be joined by the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Montwaledi. Good evening. I'm Aldrin Simpier, and this is Unfiltered. Okay, let's start off this conversation by introducing Professor Musoma. Thank you so much for making time for us this evening, Prof. Let's start off here by defining what religion is.
Religion is really about the ultimate realization of life. It's an understanding of that ultimate reality, and we do so through belief that beyond this ultimate reality, it's a deity called God. Mm-hmm. God, who is the creator, almighty, the person who actually holds our lives together. So the word religion comes from Latin religio, which means believe. And this is what precisely religion is all about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Professor Maria, would you agree with that? Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered.
Yes, to a large extent I do, but we also refer to Buddhism as a religion, and at its heart, the Buddha taught that there is nothing. There is no deity and there is no soul. There is just energy. Mm-hmm. So some people argue that Buddhism is a philosophy, and other people argue that it is a religion. And our definitions of religion can be quite tricky. So other people have argued that religions are the belief or the philosophical view that there is something transcendental. Mm-hmm. And in that way have tried to be able to capture what we refer to as a religious philosophy or understanding like Buddhism. But of course, when you take out the idea of the deity, then for some people, the argument becomes, well, is rugby not a religion? Mm-hmm. Watching a rugby game is for some people a transcendental experience. Well, is it really? And a big part of what Buddhists would argue and why life philosophies like Buddhism are considered a religion and not something like rugby is because Buddhism is a whole life philosophy. So as the professor was saying, what is life? What does life mean? And that seems to lie at the heart of almost every form of what we broadly refer to as religion. Mm.
Considering the view, Professor Maria, that you've just expressed now, and also how there are these conflicting views around what religion is, could that also be one of the sources that are at the core of why some people would say that it would be difficult to regulate religion?
Yes, exactly. And so, of course, one of the other challenges is the worship of Satan a religion? So Satanism sees Satan as a higher power, as a god, as a divine. But then professes to do things that are harmful to humanity. So certain behaviors within Satanism are very easy to regulate. We don't allow the killing of people, etc. But other behaviors are very difficult to regulate.
Such as?
Because at what point do we say it is freedom of religion and a person's own expression of that? And at what point do we help to regulate behaviors of charismatic, not in the sense of Christian charismatic, but charismatic in the sense of somebody who easily draws people in and has a following? So how do we regulate that kind of following where people teach things that are harmful to other people?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Professor Musomo, your take on that particular aspect around the various practices of religion and having to decide that this is a particular religious practice that we can say is not harmful, or who even decides that this particular religious practice is harmful when the congregant himself has used their agency and said that, sure, this is what I want to go through, this is my passage?
It is important to understand, Adrian, that to believe or not to believe is belief. In other words, there is no person who exists who does not believe. Mm-hmm. You can believe in a rock as your God. You can believe in a pumpkin as a God, which is why this is an inner transcendental experience of people. That's why we talk about spirituality. Mm-hmm. Now, what we have to understand is the fact that sometimes what we call the gospel of Jesus Christ is clothed or dressed in a cultural baggage, a cultural cloth. So you need to unpeel or to sort of peel off in order to understand this. Because the tendency which has driven many people to either individualism, to materialism, to define that I exist or I possess, therefore I exist, which is a Cartesian understanding, I believe, therefore I am. Now, it is important to understand these variables of belief. Now, when we talk about the regulation, we cannot regulate religion, but we can regulate behavior.
Yep.
I think what is a problem is that many times when we talk about the regulation, we talk about regulating the religion. Religion is like an object. You cannot regulate an object, but you can regulate the one who believes in that object. So hence, every day in our lives, in our country, we regulate the way we drive, the way we do things. Mm-hmm. But it is we look at the issue of behavior.
Yep.
We are not looking at the religion per se, because you cannot regulate the religion, but Prof, you can regulate.
But Prof. Musomo, is it not true, though, that that religion on its own, as well as the practices that are linked to it, that they are so intertwined that it would be difficult to argue that a certain practice is not a religious practice, because the person may argue that I am doing what I'm doing because of my religious beliefs, and therefore I should be allowed to do it with the full expression of what the Constitution allows me to?
That's where the difference is, the harm it brings.
Yeah.
And then we go into what we call human dignity. Freedom, human dignity, equality. Those are the elements we bring in. Now, if you believe, and your belief draws people into death, the state cannot watch people who actually use their faith to destroy other people. Mm-hmm. The purpose of faith, the purpose of belief, is to draw people to deity, transcendental experience. It is that which is at the center of religion.
Okay.
For example, if I believe in a snake as my God, and I bring my snake into church and it bites people, it kills people, I cannot continue to say, it is because of my belief when people are dying. We must separate the pristine, the purity of religion as a basis of belief in the deity, whether you have deity as understood by others or there's nothing.
Okay.
But that's where we are at.
Okay, let's just quickly
What
go to
Prof,
let's just quickly go to an ad break. We have to go to a quick ad break. We're going to go to a quick ad break. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation around the regulation of religion and whether religion should be regulated. But an interesting point that the Prof has now raised is the issue of harm. Who determines what is harm and what is not harmful? When you have a church, an organization that exists that says that we do not recognize that women can become bishops of a church, but yet the constitution of this country says that we are all equal. How does that then happen? Is that not harmful on its own? That conversation just after this. And welcome back to Unfiltered with me, Aldrin Simpier, in conversation this evening with Professor David Musomo, who's the chairperson of the Commission for Religious Linguistic Rights, the CRL Commission, as well as Professor Maria Fram-Ab, who is an associate professor in the Department of Religion Studies at the University of Johannesburg. And remember that you can be part of this conversation by using the hashtag SABC Unfiltered. Prof. Musomo, just quickly sum up the point that I was making earlier on, that, for instance, if you look at the Catholic Church that says that the Pope will be male, or the Pope is male, and the Catholic Church also finds expression and exists in South Africa where the Constitution says that all is equal. We do not discriminate based on sex.
Yes. We must understand that certain things are introduced as part of a culture of a particular nation or communities. The whole idea of the rule of men, patriarchy, is also present in some of the texts, religious texts. Mm-hmm. But if you look into the Old Testament, for instance, you'll discover that equality is in creation, where male and female are made in the image of God.
Sure.
Both of them are equal. Now, that is the origin of equality. Majority of the concepts that we have in the Constitution are drawn from some religious texts. Mm-hmm. Now, that's why I say there's a difference between the belief and the practice. So it is important to draw what it is that continues to oppress women. Is this legitimately drawn from the text, or it is the rule that is derived as a result of the practice of patriarchy, the rule of men?
Okay, Prof, let me ask you then this. Would you then say that the practices of the Catholic Church, at least, would be unconstitutional?
In terms of our own country, it will be unconstitutional.
Okay, let me bring in
Because our own Constitution speaks of equality, speaks of human dignity, speaks of freedom. But also, if you look at the texts, majority of the texts, what we call encyclicals, that are drawn by the Pope, you will find that the concepts we're talking about of equality, of freedom, of human dignity, looms large. They loom large, these particular concepts.
Okay.
So there's a theory and practice, a disjuncture between what is said theoretically and what is lived in the real life experiences.
Okay, let's get Professor Maria's take on that. Professor Maria, your take on that, and just also taking into consideration that earlier on, Professor Musomo spoke about harm being inflicted or harm being caused. And the point that I'm making is that should we also not be considering that if you have a Catholic Church that says that the presiding officer of the church, the Pope, cannot be female, does that not form part of harm?
It's a very interesting question that you raise. For most Catholics the world over, the patriarchy of the Catholic Church does not cause harm. Women don't see this as a problem. In fact, the Catholic Church is made up largely of women. Mm-hmm. But But there are a group of women within the Catholic Church that are fighting for change because they do see this as harmful. In South Africa, in other parts of Africa, in North America and Europe. And they are arguing that the Catholic Church should change its interpretation of particularly the New Testament. In the New Testament, we read in Paul, for example, saying that women must cover their heads and shouldn't speak in the synagogue. And that's been taken and understood as women not speaking out in churches. Over the last century, varying different forms of Christianity have interpreted this text very differently. And I think this is one of the things that makes these debates so difficult. The Catholic Church is one of the oldest Christian churches in the world. They believe they are the oldest church. They have 2,000 years of intense theological study of the biblical texts and then tradition. And they believe that women shouldn't be ordained. Other churches that are much younger believe that women should be ordained. And so the problem is, what is right and what is wrong? How does one, as an outside organization, regulate what churches do and say? So a suggestion has been that people should be educated. But every single Catholic priest is educated. In most churches, Catholic churches around the world, a priest must have a minimum of an undergraduate degree, normally from another Catholic university. And some of the best universities in the world, Notre Dame, for example, are Catholic universities. So the position of how we interpret texts, what do we see as harmful, and what do believers and followers themselves see as harmful, are incredibly complex and tricky issues. Then on top of that, we bring in issues of culture. Many people will say it is my culture for patriarchy to exist. And many women don't see patriarchy as a problem.
Yes.
And all of this makes it so difficult to say, how do we regulate? According to what basis do we regulate Christianity alone, let alone any of the other religions? So I'm ending at a question mark, because I don't have the answer, especially when we look at how, for example, just churches interpret their texts.
Yeah. Okay, ending on a question mark, and also as we know that when it comes to our own country, and just speaking politically as well, that you'd hear the politicians saying, for instance, that we would not take a certain subject for a referendum, for instance, capital punishment, because we know what the outcomes of a capital punishment referendum would be. However, though, as politicians, we have now taken a decision on behalf of the people that we are governing. Then shouldn't politicians also, on behalf of the people that they are governing, be taking those decisions that decide on what is harmful and what is not harmful? Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi joins us for that conversation just after this. And before we say goodbye to our SABC 3 viewers, let's just quickly bring into this conversation Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, who is the Minister of Home Affairs. And Minister, just quickly before we touch and we go into your portfolio, just speaking politically, how difficult is it to regulate the religious industry or the religious sector? Okay. Dr. Motsoaledi, I'm going to ask you to just quickly unmute yourself there.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I was not aware that I'm muted. Good evening, Professor Musoma. Good evening, Professor Faram Ab, and good evening, Aldrin and the viewers out there. I believe religion should be regulated like we regulated all other aspects of life. I fully believe so, because at any rate, In Home Affairs, we are already doing that. There's no way we are going to allow things just to happen. We are regulating the type of visas which people get when they come here for religious activities. That I regard as a form of regulation. If we don't do so, I believe there will be chaos.
What is that chaos? Dr. Mutaleedi, what would you say that chaos is if the religious sector is not...
I couldn't hear you. You were muted or something.
Okay, no, I was asking that what is that chaos that you can foresee if the religious sector is not regulated?
Well, for instance, let me explain what we are doing in Home Affairs. The well-established churches, because they are organized and structural, there's a structure. Their leaders are transferred from one country to the other.
Okay, Dr. Mutaleedi, Minister, let me just quickly say goodbye to our SABC 3 viewers, but the conversation continues on the SABC News Channel 404. Apologies for that, Minister Aaron Motsoaledi, you can go ahead and the point that you're making.
Yeah, the point I was making is the well-established churches, simply because they are structuralist, got nothing to do with colonization, because they've got a structure, their leaders are transferred from one country to the other. We provide them with general work visas. We're doing so for all the churches. But then people use the general work visa to come and establish churches. And they were just mushrooming left, right, and center. Anybody who wanted to come to South Africa through a different means, trying to avoid immigration laws, just code religion and say they are coming for that. So we had to change. We had no option but to change, and we are no longer giving them general work visas. We are giving them visitors visas to come and provide voluntary work. We are doing so in terms of Section 11, subsection 1B, Roman figure 2 of the Immigration Act. We were forced to do so by what was happening. So when I'm saying chaos, I'm giving an example like that.
Okay, and Professor Musoma, just your take on those interventions that have come from the Home Affairs Department at least, and also taking into consideration that the CRL had its own commission of inquiry looking into some of these harmful practices and how churches have been able to subvert the law.
In fact, we are very grateful as CRL because we had some interaction with the Home Affairs officials regarding these aspects. Wanting to know why do we have mushrooming of so many religious organizations led to some degree both by internal and external religious leaders. And we discovered at the time that they had a waiver concession where a religious leader coming to South Africa would be allowed. And we tried to say, but why don't you curb that? And they said, we cannot do it because that's what is provided for. And what I'm hearing Dr. Motsoaledi saying is that there is a provision which has to ensure that some kind of order is brought to bear in our country. Because the pain, the agony, the complaints that you are receiving on a daily basis are shocking. As I speak to you, we have had a number of engagement with victims and with religious leaders to establish why. Because behind all of this is the pain that our people are going through. Mm-hmm. And when they are dehumanized, they are made into objects of use, they are jumped at, their resources are taken to them under the cloak of some deity. And this is a very painful thing. Yeah. And especially because at the time we do this, they themselves don't have resources. We've got people who are receiving grants. They use the grants also to pass them over. Mm-hmm. So these are the challenges that we have.
Okay, let me just quickly bring in Minister Motsoaledi again. Minister, so the regulation that you speak of and the changing of that particular aspect around the working visa, it speaks about what legitimizes the person to be in the country. However, though, it doesn't regulate the behavior and what it is that the person is allowed to do and cannot do in the name of religion.
Well, obviously, we can only regulate it in the form of immigration. Those who want to immigrate here, all I was saying is that many immigrated under the name of religion and say, I'm going to work for such and such a church. And when they arrive here, churches start mushrooming, the charismatic churches. Now, I said we had to clamp down and change because we were giving them a general work visa. The general work visa generally is when people apply to come to South Africa on a general work visa, as different from a critical skills visa. That one is referred to the Department of Labor, and they are the ones who will decide who will come here. So we have decided that when it comes to charismatic churches, because there's no form and structure, and you don't know who to rush to if they are wrong practices, we then said we can't give them a general work visa anymore. That general work visa in Home Affairs is for religion, for sports, and for culture. That one we are controlling, but we said for charismatic churches, because of a lack of form of structure, we'll give them only a visitor's visa. That means they are visiting, and they are here to perform voluntary work.
So does it mean that they won't be paid?
They are not paid by anybody, but they are getting money from their congregants, and that we leave it to other, maybe CRR and the Department of Social Development, which registered them. From our side, we don't recognize them as coming to work, we recognize them as visiting.
Yeah.
And they are not allowed to conduct business.
Okay, and that's an important point, because what we understand is that some of these churches, of course, you'd hear that the pastor says that he is volunteering. However, though, there is payments and payments in kind that come from the church towards the pastor. Then is there no tax liability that the pastor himself also or herself also bears because of the money that came from the congregants? That conversation just after this. And welcome back to Unfiltered with me, Aldrin St-Pierre. The conversation we're having this evening is around the religious sector and whether the religious sector should be regulated. Just quickly want to play a clip from the former chairperson of the CRL, who did an investigation, was leading that commissioner of inquiry into the conduct of some churches as well as the commercialization of religion. That is Toro Mkhwanazi. Just take a listen to what she has to say, and then we'll bring into the conversation churches or religious bodies and finances.
You have a problem with prayer, I see.
We just want to know which bank account keeps the money from tithes, from donations, from the ministry itself. Where does the money go to?
Okay, and let's ask Professor Mosomo to come up, please. Prof, just listening into what Metogo had emphasized now, and even in that report itself, it indicates that there are uncontrolled movement of cash in and out of the country. There's also avoidance of tax to SARS.
Yes, in fact, it's a very prevalent situation, because in our investigative research, we found that some of the foreign religious leaders repatriated resources from South Africa. And it was clear in their own statement, management statement, that this is what they are doing.
Was it only foreign religious leaders, or does it include South Africans as well?
Repatriation of resources to others outside the borders of South Africa. But of course, in South Africa, we discovered that there are many religious leaders did not even have bank accounts. And some of the resources are put under mattresses, and there's no difference between the money that belongs to the church and the money that belongs to the religious leader. And we have documented that situation here in our environment, and which is why then we talked to SARS, and SARS says they had a sort of the different levels of payment of SARS of tax,
Yes.
which is why we wanted SARS to make sure that the threshold, they must look at the threshold, and that religious institutions must register for tax purposes. Even for monies that are given in kind, as long as you are given that money in kind in lieu of the work done, that money is taxable.
Okay, Minister Mutsalile, I don't know from any of the research that you've done around the mushrooming of churches, in charismatic churches, as you described them earlier on, particularly here in South Africa, what is it that has led to that, and why is it that we are seeing all of these allegations of now we hear about the money laundering as well?
Well, as far as I understand, the economic climate in the country, the situation in which we are, which is a situation of hardship, make people start believing in miracles. And of course, these churches are offering miracles. But unfortunately, in Home Affairs, we can only control those who come from outside, because we do so by the immigration law.
Yep.
Those who are inside the country, we leave them to other institutions. Like Professor already said, SARS must come in, because I can't do anything about a person who established a church here in South Africa and is a South African and is being followed and is practicing all the wrong things. But on my side, I want to believe some of the churches are used to wash dirty money, to clean it up and make it official, because they are not being followed by the laws that follows other businesses in as far as money is concerned. So I want to argue, money is money. Regardless of the way in which you get it, it must be followed up, it must be regulated.
Yep.
Tax authorities must come in. Otherwise, we'll be in serious trouble.
But what about your department in terms of its investigations and finding out whether those who have come under the visitors' visas are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing and not involved in any other criminality, including breaking the law and starting their businesses like the likes of Bushir?
No, yes, that's exactly what has happened. And that's why we are taking him up, because he came here on a visitor's visa, under which he was not supposed to have done certain things, but he has done them, showing very well that this issue of religion is just being used as an entry point. And that's why we just can't allow it to go on like that.
But what does it say, Minister, about your department and your officials, those ones that are employed to make sure that they uphold the constitution of the country?
Well, the unfortunate part, Aldrin, is that, and I've said that before and I want to repeat it here, I've discovered that some officials are not patriotic. They do not love this country. They can sell it to the highest bidder for pieces of silver. And that is what has happened, because most of the fraud that happens there cannot happen without somebody working in Home Affairs helping. And indeed, I'm not going to stand here and hide and say there's no corruption in the department. That's why we are the only department in government that has got a branch headed by a deputy director general for what we call anti-corruption, because we know that corruption and that anti-corruption is not for outsiders, it's for people working inside. I'm sure you are aware that just last week, there were 3 people who were arrested in Zimbabwe by the Hawks selling birth certificates. We have just had a lady who we posted to our mission in Namibia, who was selling visas to Pakistani and Bangladeshi visitors to come here illegally but using official visas because they were issued officially by an official working for Home Affairs. So I actually, during my budget speech this year, I appealed to unions because sometimes they actually defend them. I appealed them that much as they have got the right to defend their members, they must also consider patriotism. They must ask their members to be patriotic, not to sell the country to the highest bidder. So yes, there are religious leaders who get this documentation from Home Affairs officials for pieces of silver.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to get our closing remarks, including from Professor Maria, around some of the legislation perhaps that could be put in place to ensure that we also safeguard some of the ideas that some people have around what they understand religion to be. But then vis-a-vis, you have on the other end some people exploiting those loopholes. And welcome back to Unfiltered with me, Alderin Simpier. Let's look at some of those tweets that you sent through, and then we'll get closing remarks from our panelists. Ntozini, who says that yes, the religious sector should be regulated if only Christianity could be treated like what they are, a mere religion, and half of the challenges will be defeated. The Constitution of South Africa is the supreme law of all laws in the country. Thus, all religions should be so as to work for SA, not church leaders. And Mark saying that, are you aware that all old churches are also foreign? They actually originate from Europe and were introduced to us by the missionaries. Okay, Samuel, just quickly get some closing remarks. Professor Musoma, let's start off with you. Closing remarks as we end off this conversation.
First and foremost is that what seems to be happening with the preponderance of religious institutions is that there is a widespread impoverishment of South Africans by using all manner of tricks to impoverish them by, for example, the issue of miracles. If those miracles were turning to be true, and in fact, I'm not debunking that the miracles are not there, but the miracles that are being sold, if they were true, some of the impoverished people will be rich. Because what happens is that the individuals who are actually perpetrators of miracles becoming richer, and the people becoming even more poorer. And the second thing is what I call the bringing religion into disrepute. For example, when you look at what happened with Lukau, with the resurrection of that individual, it was a con type of resurrection. So they actually bringing religion into disrepute. And finally, it is the violation of human dignity, which is at the center of what actually we are worried about. When our people are turned into objects of exploitation, and this cannot be tolerated.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Professor Maria, let's get some closing remarks from your end.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I think that what the professor and the minister have said are so right. We have to fight for the dignity of our people, and we have to put in place measures to try and protect every South African and those that are foreigners in South Africa that go to these churches. But how do we do this? According to what are we regulating these churches? And I think we have an amazing constitution, and we should be using our constitution. We should be looking at these churches and seeing where they fall short. We should be looking at the churches and seeing where are they abusing people. Now, one of the problems with something like that is that people are freely giving their money to these churches. People say they are not being bullied into or being oppressed into being sprayed with doom or giving all their savings to the church. How do we regulate what is people's free choice? So how is it different giving your money to Shepherd Bushiri or spending your money at the casino? You know, your chances of getting money are very, very slim, but there's a chance. There's a chance that the miracle might happen for you. And so what's crept into many of these churches is a kind of lottery-style theology in which maybe today God will bless you. And that brings us full circle back to what I was saying at the beginning. How do we regulate what churches preach?
Okay.
According to what standard?
Okay, thank you so much for that, Professor Maria. Minister, let's just quickly get some closing remarks from your end. And also, as you give your closing remarks, Minister, what then do we make of members of Parliament, for instance, some of your colleagues, the likes of Boy Mamabulo, who's argued that Minister Motsoaledi, don't think the Department of Home Affairs is yours. You are a minister there. The president can remove you at any time.
Well, the part that is true is that the president can remove me at any one time. Every minister anywhere around the world can be removed anytime, and there are no rules for that. That is the only part that is true. But I did give a warning to him that members of parliament who are lawmakers cannot then come back under whatever pretext, religious or what, to encourage that the same laws be breached. What I was doing was to apply the immigration law, which was passed by Parliament. And if you are a member of Parliament, that binds you. So when I apply it, it cannot be a member of Parliament. That impedes that. That's wrong, and that's why it has been given over to the Chief Whip to do something about it. The other thing I want to say is that we must understand that Section 10 of our Constitution in the Bill of Rights talks about human dignity. Everyone has an inherent dignity and the right to have their dignity respected and protected. And who must protect that dignity? It is the state. And what can impede that dignity? If you are in trouble and somebody lies to you because you are vulnerable and promise you miracles in exchange for your money, your hard-earned cash, surely somebody must come and protect that dignity because you are being undignified by being lied to. How many times have we seen adults having had all their savings, even professionals sometimes, crying on national TV because all their savings are gone because they've been duped into believing that their money will double? That is, their dignity has been impugned. Now, Prof. Maria here, please allow me to call you that. I'm fine. It's a bit difficult to pronounce the other part of your name, so I'll just call you Professor Maria. You are talking about things like casinos, machonistas, and all that. They are all regulated. Casinos are regulated. I know that they are cheating people because they believe they win, but there are regulations, they pay tax. There are certain things they can do and there are certain things they can't do. So in the same manner, I believe we must impose some regulation on religion, even if people are giving freely.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Dr. Aaron Motshali, the Minister of Home Affairs. And earlier on, we were joined by Professor David Masomo, the Chairperson of the Commission for Religious and Linguistic Rights. And we also had Professor Maria. We've come to the end of this evening's conversation. Thank you so much for your contributions. From me, Aldrin Simpier, and the rest of the team, it is a good night for now. After this, the Globe is up with Pitandoro, the young old man.
Yes, always, always, always.